The day they left, they didn't even say goodbye. I came home from my shift at the hospital. 12 hours on my feet, the kind of tired that lives in your bones, and the driveway was empty. Not just my dad's truck. Everything. The moving van, the boxes they'd been packing for weeks while pretending nothing was happening, my mom's hanging plants that had lived on the front porch since I was 7 years old. Gone. I stood at the end of the driveway for a long time, just stood there. The neighbors across the street, the Hendersons, their porch light flickered on. I must have looked like a ghost standing in the dark. I wasn't crying. I think I was too numb to cry. I went inside. Or I tried to. My key still worked, which surprised me, honestly. I half expected them to have changed the locks before they pulled out of the neighborhood. The living room was bare. The couch where my dad watched football every Sunday gone. The family photos that had lined the hallway wall since before I could remember. Gone. Even the curtains. They took the curtains. There was a note on the kitchen counter. It said, "We left your boxes in the second bedroom. Good luck, Nora. Good luck, Nora. Good luck, Nora." 27 years old. A registered nurse. The person who had been paying half the utility bills for the past 3 years because my parents kept saying they were a little tight this month. The person who had missed 2 Thanksgivings because I picked up holiday shifts so I could hand my mom an envelope of cash before Christmas. The person who had, without being asked, taken care of my grandmother every single weekend for the last year of her life because my parents were too overwhelmed. Good luck, Nora. I sat down on the kitchen floor because there was nowhere else to sit, and I read that note maybe 6 times. I need to back up, because this didn't come out of nowhere. It never does. I'm the middle child. I have an older sister, Diane, who has always been my mother's favorite in the way that some people's favorites are, openly, unapologetically, with no attempt to hide it. Diane is funny and loud and charismatic. She lights up rooms. She also hasn't held a steady job since 2019, borrowed money from my parents regularly, and once let her electricity get shut off because she'd spent her bill money on a girls' trip to Nashville. My parents drove 2 hours to bring her groceries the week after. My younger brother Patrick is the baby. He's 23. He still doesn't do his own laundry when he visits. When he moved back home after college, just for a year, that year turned into 2, and nobody said a word about it except to make sure his room was comfortable. And then there's me. I was the one who cooked dinner on weekdays when both my parents worked late. I was the one who drove my grandmother to her chemotherapy appointments, while Diane said she was too emotional to handle it, and Patrick said he had work stuff. I was the one who figured out how to file an appeal when my parents' health insurance denied my dad's knee surgery claim. I did that on my lunch break. I never mentioned it again. I don't say any of this to make myself sound like a saint. I wasn't. I was just the kid who noticed what needed to be done and did it, because somebody had to. What I got in return, mostly, was being taken for granted. Not cruelty, exactly. More like invisibility. My mom would call Diane 3 times a week. She called me when something needed to be handled. My dad would ask Patrick about his plans, his dreams, his life. He asked me if I could look at the water heater because it was making a noise again. I told myself it was fine. I told myself this is just how families worked sometimes. I told myself a lot of things. The house itself was the issue, on paper. We'd all grown up in it, a 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. My parents bought it in the 90s for a price that sounds almost comical now. By the time I was in my late 20s, the neighborhood had changed. New restaurants, young families moving in, property values doing things nobody expected. My parents had been talking about downsizing for a couple of years. My dad's knees were bad. The yard was too much to maintain. They wanted something smaller, maybe in Arizona near my dad's brother. That part I understood. That part was completely reasonable. What was not reasonable was how they handled it. They started having conversations, real ones, with a realtor in September. I know this now. I did not know it then. I found out later from a neighbor who saw the realtor's car that there had been multiple showings by October. In November, my mom sat me down at the kitchen table. I remember it clearly because she'd made coffee, and she never made coffee just for the 2 of us. I thought something was wrong. I thought someone was sick. "We've accepted an offer on the house," she said. I stared at her. "We close in 6 weeks," she said. "You'll need to figure out your living situation." 6 weeks. I asked her when they had listed it. She looked somewhere past my left shoulder and said they'd been talking to a realtor for a little while. I asked her why she hadn't said anything. She said they hadn't wanted to stress me out. I sat with that for a second. "Where are you going?" I asked. She lit up then. Fully, completely lit up. "Scottsdale, near Uncle Dennis. We found a lovely little place. It has a pool, Nora. Uncle Dennis. We found a lovely little place. It has a pool, Nora. Can you imagine? We're so excited." She was excited. She had been planning a whole new life for months and hadn't said a word to me, and she was excited. "What about Diane?" I asked. "Patrick? They've known for a couple of months," she said. "We told them earlier because Diane needed time to adjust." Diane needed time to adjust. Diane needed time. I got 6 weeks. I didn't say anything else. I got up, rinsed my coffee cup, and went to my room. I heard my mom on the phone with Diane 20 minutes later, laughing about something. Here's the thing about being the reliable one in a family: you get very good at not falling apart. You learn to process things in small, quiet pieces. You learn to function, so I functioned. I went to work the next day. I took care of my patients. I ate lunch. I called my best friend, Tamara, on my break and told her what had happened in a flat, calm voice, and she said, "Nora, are you okay?" And I said, "I'm figuring it out," and I meant it. I had some money saved, not a lot by some people's standards, but I'd been careful. I've been working extra shifts since my late 20s because I had a general sense, not even a specific fear, just a sense, that I shouldn't count on anything I hadn't built myself. I started looking at apartments. Columbus wasn't cheap anymore, but there were options. I found a couple of decent one-bedrooms. I told myself this was actually fine, a fresh start. My own place, no one else's schedule, no one else's mess. And then something happened that I did not plan. I was driving past the house one afternoon, my house, the one I'd grown up in, and I saw the listing sign in the yard with the sale pending rider on it. And something just stopped in my chest. I pulled over. I sat there. I looked at that house. I thought about the summer I was 9 and I'd fallen off my bike in the driveway and my dad had carried me inside. I thought about the kitchen, where I taught myself to cook real meals from YouTube videos because my mom worked evenings. I thought about my grandmother sitting in the living room in her last months, and how I'd held her hand there and how that room was probably already being measured by strangers. I called my realtor contact, a woman I'd helped find a specialist for her husband and who had since become a friend, and I asked her a strange question. "If I wanted to put in an offer on a house that's already under contract," I said, "what would it take?" She walked me through it. The current offer could fall through. Financing issues happened all the time. Or, if the sellers were willing, a significantly better offer could sometimes cause them to reconsider, even with a signed contract, depending on the contingencies. I asked her what significantly better meant. She told me. I thought about my savings. I thought about a small amount of money my grandmother had left me in her will. Not a huge sum, but quietly set aside in an account I'd barely touched because it had felt wrong to spend it. I thought about what she would have wanted. I made an offer. I didn't tell my parents. I told my realtor to keep my name out of it for as long as legally possible. The offer went through an LLC I'd set up months earlier for a rental property I'd been vaguely considering. It had a neutral name, nothing that would connect to me. The current buyer's financing fell through 3 days later. My offer was accepted the following week. I didn't tell anyone except Tamara, who had listened to me cry about this family more times than I could count, who had helped me move boxes into a spare room at her apartment when I needed somewhere to stay during the transition, sat across from me at her kitchen table and stared. "You bought the house," she said. "I bought the house. Your parents' house. It's my house now, technically." She covered her mouth with both hands. I couldn't tell if she was going to laugh or cry. She did both, a little. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Move back in," I said. After closing. The closing happened quietly. My parents were already in Scottsdale by then. They never knew who the buyer was. The LLC name meant nothing to them. They got their money. They were happy. They sent a group text to the family chat saying they'd officially closed and that they loved their new place and that the pool was everything. I read that text standing in what was now, legally, my living room. The first month was strange. I repainted the living room. I bought my own furniture. Not expensive, but mine, chosen by me, arranged the way I wanted. I filled the kitchen with things I actually used. I planted tomatoes in the backyard because I'd always wanted to, and nobody had let me because my mom was particular about the garden. I didn't tell my family, not because I was hiding exactly. I just didn't volunteer it. When my mom called to check in, I said I was settled somewhere. When she asked for my new address, I said I'd send it when I had everything sorted. She didn't press. That was, honestly, very on brand. 6 weeks after I moved in, I got a text from my mom. Nora, the new owners were supposed to reach out about some mail being sent to the old address. Have you heard from them? Do you have contact info? I looked at that text for a long time. Then I looked around my living room, at my couch, at my tomato plants visible through the back window, at the walls I had repainted the exact color I'd wanted since I was 15. I typed back, I can look into it. I didn't say anything else. 2 weeks after that, my dad called. He said the realtor had mentioned there might be some paperwork issue with the property transfer and he needed to get in touch with the new owner directly. Could I help track them down? I'll see what I can do, I said. 3 months in, my sister Diane called out of nowhere. She was in Columbus for a weekend, she said, visiting friends. She asked if she could stop by my new place. I said sure. I gave her the address. I watched her pull up from the front window. I watched her look at the house. I watched her look at the address on her phone. I watched her look at the house again. She sat in her car for almost 4 minutes. I timed it. Then she got out and walked up the porch steps, the same porch steps we'd run up and down 1,000 times as kids, and knocked on my door. I opened it. "Hey," I said. She looked at me. She looked past me into the living room. Different paint, different furniture, same bones, same staircase, same window in the kitchen where afternoon light came through at a particular angle that I'd loved my whole life. "Nora," she said, "this is my house," I said. "Do you want to come in?" She sat down at my kitchen table, the same spot where my mom had told me I had 6 weeks, and she didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, she said, "Did Mom and Dad know it was you?" "No," I said. "Do they know now?" "Not yet." She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. It wasn't guilt exactly, more like recalibration. Like she was seeing something she'd always looked past and was now unable to look away from. "Why?" she asked. I thought about how to answer that. I thought about every time I'd driven my grandmother to a treatment while Diane was too emotional. Every envelope of cash handed over before Christmas. Every utility bill, every insurance appeal, every weekend I'd worked so I could help keep this household running while being treated like part of the furniture. "Because I wanted to," I said, "and because I could, and because nobody ever thought I would." She didn't have a good answer for that. Neither would I, in her position. I told my parents 3 months later, not dramatically, not as a confrontation. I called my mom on a regular Tuesday night and I told her in the same flat, calm voice I'd learned to use for difficult things, that I was the one who had purchased the house. There was a long silence. "That's Nora, that's our home," she said. "It was," I said. "Now it's mine." "Why didn't you tell us?" I could have listed reasons. Instead, I said, "You gave me 6 weeks' notice, after planning for months. You told Diane and Patrick before you told me. I figured out my own situation." Another silence. "We didn't think," she started. "I know," I said. "That was sort of the whole thing." My dad got on the phone. He asked if this was some kind of retaliation. I told him no, genuinely. I told him I wasn't angry or not anymore, that I'd bought the house because I loved it and because I had the means to do it and because it had felt right. "Then why didn't you just tell us it was you?" he asked. "Because I knew you would have reacted," I said, "and I didn't want to make the decision based on your reaction. I wanted to make it based on what I wanted." He didn't respond to that. My mom cried a little. She said she hoped we could move forward. I said I hoped so too, and I meant it. I'm not a person who enjoys distance. I just needed to exist in my own life on my own terms for the first time. It's been almost a year now. The tomatoes did great. I learned to make my grandmother's soup recipe the right way, with the correct kind of paprika that I'd looked up online because nobody in the family had written it down. I hosted Thanksgiving. First time anyone in my generation had done it. Tamara came. A few colleagues from the hospital. My brother Patrick actually showed up, which surprised me, and helped with dishes without being asked, which surprised me more. Diane came too. She was quieter than usual. At one point, she found me in the kitchen and said kind of quietly, "I didn't know it was that bad." I almost said it wasn't that bad out of reflex, the way I'd been trained to minimize. Instead, I just said, "Yeah, it was." She nodded. We didn't hug or have a movie moment, but it was something. My parents called on Thanksgiving morning. My dad asked about the furnace. Apparently, they'd had some trouble with the one in Arizona, and he wanted to know if I'd had the Columbus furnace serviced recently. I told him I had in October. He said good. That one had always needed attention in November. It was the most practical conversation we'd ever had about the house. After I hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a minute. Outside, the backyard was bare in the November cold. The tomato plants were gone, cut back for winter, but the beds were still there waiting. I thought about how long I had waited. I thought about the note on the counter, "Good luck, Nora," and how it had felt like an ending and had turned out to be something else entirely. I went back to the living room where my guests were already arguing about football, and Tamara was winning and the soup was on the stove. I was home. I've thought a lot about what the note said. "Good luck, Nora." 4 words on a piece of paper left on a counter in an empty house. I used to think it was cold. Now I think it was just honest, maybe the most honest thing my family had ever said to me. They genuinely believed I needed luck. They had no idea I'd been quietly building something they couldn't see. That's the thing about being the one who handles everything without asking for credit. People start to think the handling just happens on its own. They stop seeing the person doing it. My parents saw a daughter who showed up, fixed problems, and didn't make noise about it. What they missed was that the same person who filed their insurance appeals on her lunch break was also saving money, reading contracts, and paying attention to the world in ways that would matter later. I don't think my parents were villains. I've had to sit with that for a while, because it would be easier if they were. But my mom isn't cruel. She's just someone who learned early on that I would be fine, and so she stopped checking. My dad isn't heartless. He just never had to think about what I needed because I never forced him to. Diane got attention because she demanded it. Patrick got softness because he was the youngest. I got trusted with the hard things because I could handle them. And somewhere in there, "can handle it" became "doesn't need anything." That's not an excuse for them. But understanding it helped me stop carrying the anger like it was something I owed myself. What I figured out, slowly over the past year of living in this house, in my house, is that integrity is a long game. Not in a passive way, not just wait and it'll work out. More like the choices you make quietly when no one is watching and no one will know end up being the architecture of your actual life. Every shift I picked up instead of going out. Every paycheck I saved instead of spent. Every time I studied a lease or asked a question I felt embarrassed to ask. Those weren't sacrifices. They were decisions. They compounded. The same is true in the other direction. Every time my family chose convenience over honesty, they were making a decision too. Telling Diane and Patrick months before telling me wasn't a small thing. It was a choice made quietly that said something real about how they saw me. And it had a consequence, not a punishment I designed, just a natural outcome of years of that kind of choosing. Tamara asked me once if I felt like I'd won something. I had to think about it. I don't think winning is the right word. I think I finally stopped waiting for permission to take up space. That's different. Winning implies someone else lost. What actually happened is that I just arrived. In my own life, on my own terms, in the house I grew up in, with tomatoes in the backyard and soup on the stove and people around a table who actually wanted to be there. Nora didn't get lucky. Nora got to work. There's a difference, and it matters more than most people think.